Yay Media Group.
Why is it that we drink the way that we do? And what happens to our bodies, to our minds when we stop or even dial back a bit? Health psychologist and alcohol researcher Megan Strowger joins me to break down the science behind alcohol's effects on things like sleep, anxiety, inflammation, cancer risk, and the social forces that are quietly shaping our habits. This isn't a conversation about judgment or restriction. It's about understanding the science so that we can make informed choices when it comes to our own relationship with alcohol. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. This episode about alcohol, it's not about what we should or shouldn't do. It's about education. So I often think about alcohol the same way that I think about something like added sugar. Understanding how added sugar affects our bodies, it doesn't mean that we're never going to eat ice cream again, but it does mean that when we understand the physiology, we understand how it affects our glucose levels, our inflammation, our cravings, our mood, our long-term health, we can then decide how is it best to fit into our lives. And alcohol really deserves the same treatment. There's a lot of emotion tied up in it, though. We use alcohol in all types of circumstances when we're celebrating, when we're relaxing. It's part of our identity, it's part of our culture. And when emotion is entering the conversation, it can become a lot harder to see that science clearly. So, for this episode, as we're talking about alcohol and our consumption and our relationship with alcohol, we're intentionally stripping away the emotion and looking at what alcohol really does inside of our bodies. We're also asking an important question. Does the science align with the messaging that we've been given, that messaging that's shaped so much by marketing and industry influence? This conversation is here to give you that scientific background. It's not to persuade, it's not to judge, it's so that you can decide what your relationship with alcohol looks like moving forward. For some, that might mean keeping things exactly the same. You clearly understand both sides of this equation and you feel really comfortable with kind of where you are with your relationship with alcohol. For others, though, it might mean dialing back. It might mean stepping away entirely. And both can be good options when we have all of that information. The goal is simple. It's clarity over confusion, physiology over emotion, and really informed choice over fear. Big task ahead of us. And to help us do this, I'm joined today by Megan Strowger, PhD. Megan is a health psychologist whose research focuses on just this alcohol use and the social and environmental factors that shape our drinking habits. She's looked at things like how these in the moment cues and how social media can influence our behavior. She's completed her doctorate in health psychology at Old Dominion University, followed by postdoc fellowship training at Brown University, and she's currently based in the Alcohol Research Lab at the University of Buffalo. Megan's published multiple peer-reviewed papers on alcohol use, including a 2025 review that examines what actually happens when we take a break from drinking. So, Megan, welcome. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here too.
So you've done a lot of research in this, and when I read several different papers that you were either a part of or had been the lead author on, and I'm like, wow, I really want to talk with her. I really want to kind of dive deeper into the science and really kind of peel back the layers of there's so much that we are learning about how alcohol affects us and really kind of talk about the why. Before we do all that, what got you into this area, this field of research?
Yeah, so I guess my journey was a bit of a longer and more circuitous route to alcohol research, but it was really grounded in a solid interest in nutrition and health and exercise and health behaviors. And as I worked in more research labs and gained more experience in different topics related to health, I started to see a common through line across all of them that alcohol was touching all aspects of people's people's lives who are trying to live healthier. And that is what led me to pursue my doctoral training at Old Dominion University with Dr. Abby Breitman, who really specializes in preventing young adults from starting down the path of more problematic drinking. And it was it was a long journey, but that's how I got to this field.
And tell us about the paper that was published just last fall. It's gotten a lot of attention.
Yes. So during my postdoctoral fellowship at Brown University in the Center for Alcohol and Addiction Studies, I started working with two researchers, Suzanne Colby and Matthew Mizell, who are both faculty there. And I had come into the postdoctoral program really interested from a personal stance about the effects of dry January. They were just starting this review paper where we were systematically looking through all literature that mentions the phrase dry January, and being really inclusive and not picking articles and choosing them based on our own narrative, which has happened. And I'm sure we'll get to chat a little more about that later. But we identified 16 studies that were about dry January, and they ranged in all different methodological designs, all different numbers of participants, different focuses of what kind of outcomes they were looking at, and really got a pretty solid picture that overall dry January participation has way more benefits than it does downsides to it. And there are really not many reasons to not give it a try.
I can't even think of one. Like, are there any downsides?
I think there was one study out of 16 that participants did report that they socialized a bit less. But on the flip side, there was another study in that review that also found that people said, I brought my friends into it. I had them participate with me. I planned more activities that didn't center around drinking. And that made my time to January more enjoyable. It is there, with psychology, there's a lot of individual differences that are going to affect how we experience something.
And the social aspect of knowing, like with something like dry January, knowing that others are in this with you and that others are also doing this in the case of something like dry January all over the world, it can help kind of give you that boost to stay focused on it and to know that like you're not in it alone. I mentioned to you by email, we have the alcohol free for 40 challenge. And we started that in the first year that we did it was 2016. So this is our 11th year coming up. So we'll be launching it again in February. Our Eat Fit nonprofit restaurant initiative has grown around the state. We now do this in 6 locations across the state. So our dietitians are hosting it in 6 cities. People can come. We've got between like 500 and 700 people each year that come and do this in person now. We're doing all these labs and metrics, and we do them again at the end. But it's been really cool. And I'll say that first year, and I want to ask how your researches affect your personal behaviors. But that first year, I was like, we drank like typical New Orleans drinkers. And I said, if before we do this, I want to give myself my own test, my own kind of personal challenge and see how do I feel going 40 days without drinking. And after 1 week, I asked my physician to redo some labs because some of the markers were really high. After 1 week, they had dropped to normal limits. Things that I'm not an anxious person, but things that had been causing some anxiety in some situations completely neutralized. And so after 1 week, I thought, I don't think I'm going back. And that's been, gosh, over 10 years now. But it
That's
wasn't one of those
awesome.
things I went into with that as the goal. But for me, that was the best takeaway from it. But how about you? How has it affected your own personal relationship, the knowledge and what you see in research?
So in terms of stopping drinking, it was a couple of years ago, and because I'm interested in social media, I probably spend more time than I should. But it's
It's
also it's also part of my research and informs what kind of things I would like to study if I don't see them coming up in the literature. But for the month of January, I noticed this uptick in advertisements for non-alcohol beverages, and the people that were featured in these advertisements, they looked like they were my age. The beverages were looking aesthetically pleasing, and I kept seeing them. And that repetition, by the end of January, I thought at the same concurrently, I was probably engaging in heavier drinking than I know I should. I know better. And it was due to more social factors, which plays into what I research. there was a lot of peer pressure from the people around me who were engaging in heavier drinking, possibly on their way to an alcohol use disorder. And I thought, I think maybe I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to stop something. Like, I had been having a lot of issues with my sleep and having a lot of night sweats and waking up and feeling anxious about what happened the night before. So that was one big change in my life, that I was sleeping better and more deeply. I was feeling more restored when I woke up in the morning and wasn't having as much anxiety. And I am a person who's a little bit more predisposed to being a more anxious type person. So this is an important change for me. And yeah, I think those changes really stuck with me. And I was kind of thinking, I don't think I need to go back to this, because I was also spending a lot of money. There are a lot of empty calories in the beverages I was enjoying, because I was into high alcohol by volume, craft beer, and really flavored fruity stuff, so high sugar. And I thought, this is not serving me. And I was at the same time really getting into running. And I thought, this is not benefiting my ability to be better or faster at running. So that's a little bit about, and I haven't gone back since. It's been about 3 years for me, and I'm 30, turning 35 now, so I'd say it's been really good for my
Right.
30s.
So, am I hearing right that that social media actually kind of increased your awareness of the non-alcoholic options? So almost kind of the what your feed was, the algorithm was choosing things that actually ended up helping you, whereas a lot of your research is also saying that when someone's following people who are heavy drinkers, that can influence them in that way too. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure with social media.
So when we talk about kind of, you mentioned some of the experiences that you felt, sleep. We both felt, you being more prone to anxiety, myself, I think being less prone, yet we were both feeling more anxious with alcohol and less whenever we removed it. Let's kind of dive into the things that happen. So I think a lot of people do know, but if not, alcohol is a tremendous sleep disruptor. It can help us fall asleep. It can make us feel sleepier, and that falling asleep can feel easier when we've had cocktail or cocktails plural. But it is backfiring and it's disrupting our sleep. So talk with us a little bit about what's happening, why a lot of times we may wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, why we feel sometimes people wake up, their heart's racing or any of this stuff. What's going on that causes that to happen inside of our bodies?
Yeah, so you started on the main thing, is that about 20% of our population says that they're using alcohol to help with their sleep. And the one thing it can do is, yes, it can help you fall asleep quicker. And I even, as an anecdote, I saw a post from January today that was kind of highlighting that point, that once someone stops drinking, you can notice that it just takes longer. You're lying in bed and you're not falling asleep, and then it can take a week or 2 for that to, like, reduce, and you will fall asleep.
Yeah. I'll stop real
But
quick. When we have the alcohol free for 40 and we tell people that they're gonna start sleeping better, we started having to kinda asterisk it because exactly that. People would be upset and say, "You told me I was gonna be sleeping better, but it's been worse these few days." But it takes a little bit for your body to adjust.
yes, it can take a few weeks to a month to really feel some of those effects in a more pronounced way. But I'd say within the first week, or within after the first weekend of not doing it, you're definitely going to feel some things, like you're gonna have less brain fog, you're gonna feel more energetic, maybe better concentration. These are some of the subjective effects that people report within that month. And of course, we'll get into the biological aspects a little bit later. But what's happening with sleep is, like alcohol, yes, you'll fall asleep quicker, but you'll spend more time in a state of sedation where you're kind of knocked out. It's called deep sleep. And normally, deep sleep can have some implications for, like, restoration, memory consolidation, learning, but it's disrupting. You have deep sleep, you have light sleep, which is what you start at. And then you have like an in between stage that's like slightly deeper sleep, but not all the way. And we also have REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So we have all those 4 stages of sleep. You normally spend about half your night in a period of lighter sleep, and the rest of your night you're circling between being like this sedation or you're having the rapid eye movement sleep, which is best known for that restoration process, really consolidating all your memories and what you learned throughout the day. And so you're falling asleep, you're spending so much time in this period of being knocked out. And then at the end of your sleep cycle, you're in this REM sleep that's supposed to be restoring you. But then it's time for to start your new day. Most adults in the US are not getting 7 hours of sleep. So they may not be benefiting from that smaller period of REM sleep at the very end of their night. And they're waking up then feeling more groggy and less rested, that brain fog, and they're not starting your day off on the right foot.
And what happens can you speak to, like, when that early, like, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, when someone's drinking, a lot of times they're like, "Oh my god, I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning." And, what's going on that our bodies feel like because it'll be wide awake then, and then when they're finally getting back to sleep, it's what you said, and then it's time to get up and they're feeling terrible. But why do we have that cycle of kind of awakeness or anxiousness that'll happen in those early hours of the morning?
So the other part, so as I said, you're more or less spending a little more time either knocked out or in a lighter type of sleep. So you are more prone to it's more easy for you to be awakened by something. But the other half of those, like, why are you waking up at 3 in the morning, are some things to do with the metabolism of alcohol in your body, such that alcohol, for example, is a diuretic. So you can wake up in the middle of the night and you go to the bathroom. A lot of these waking periods is the alcohol has been metabolized. It's starting to leave your body. And your body's like, oh, I have things I need to get done. You can also have those night sweats because it's increasing your internal core body temperature, and you can wake up feeling really sweaty and uncomfortable and needing to move around or change the way you're sleeping. And there's also periods of sleep apnea that can increase. So, not breathing, like having issues with your breathing while sleeping. And all of these things can be part of why you're waking up in the middle of the night, because your body has functions it needs to attend to that it can't while you're in this sedated, knocked out phase of sleep.
So, as someone is stepping away from alcohol, and whether it's a dry January or making something like alcohol free for 40, taking this like self experiment, prepare yourself. Some people are fortunate and they notice right away, wow, my sleep is better. But like Megan said, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's longer, but stick with it. And you also were talking about some of the other changes that you can start to see right away, less brain fog, more clarity. A lot of times things like, and we can move on to visible signs. I kind of want to go to anxiety next, but the visible signs, a lot of times, puffiness in your face, and like you may start to see changes in that right away. And so, what I would recommend is if you're crabby because you feel like I'm not getting to sleep as quickly as I used to when I was drinking, what's going on here? Keep that focus on the other positives. And some of it might be anxiety that we'll talk about next, but keep that focus on the positive because the sleep will eventually catch up. And again, one more thing on sleep is making sure we're using, I love the phrase sleep hygiene, making sure you're using good sleep hygiene. We've done a lot of, I think it's either 4 or 5 different podcasts with Dr. Erin Hanlon. She's a sleep expert based out of Chicago. And so I'll link to those, yourself up for a good night's sleep. All right. So anxiety, this is one that to me it's so interesting. And I think so many people drink because they feel anxiety. They drink, and I don't even think people it's a fact. People are drinking to unwind, they're drinking to relax, they're drinking to turn down the noise, numb out, whatever is that thing that they're looking for, and it is doing the exact opposite. It is fueling our anxiety. It's exacerbating, worsening our anxiety. And I think that's probably one of the least talked about effects of alcohol. And it's one of the effects that is so far reaching for almost so many of us. I don't want to say everyone, but maybe almost everyone is going to have some level of anxiety related to alcohol. And it is something that can improve relatively rapidly. You can see the difference. And going a few nights without drinking can really start to show in how we handle stressful situations very quickly. A lot of cases, maybe way more quickly than your sleep is going to improve. Something like this will help. But what's going on that it is what's happening with, like, our body's stress response that alcohol is kinda doing the opposite of what people are using it for?
Yes. So at first, alcohol can affect the neurotransmitters in the brain known as GABA, and these are known for promoting relaxation and reducing your anxiety. So at the start of a drinking episode, it can have that intended effect.
Right.
But what happens is as the alcohol is metabolized towards the end of your drinking episode, starting to leave the system, these levels of this neurotransmitter, they can drop and they're replaced by another transmitter, glutamate. And this is leading to being more excited and which is promoting that heightened anxiety. And this is all like you start with sleep and it's really all
Right.
as we talk, I find everything is very much connected. Oh, it's like everything, nothing no simple. Alcohol is impacting all aspects of your body. So that rebounds like of that other neurotransmitter, it heightens your anxiety. This happens with the withdrawal of alcohol from the body. And this is where that sensation of anxiety, which is a newer term I've seen pop up in the last few years, that's where it can, which can range from feeling a little uneasy to panic attacks. That's kind of where that comes from. Some people also cite anecdotally, of course, that anxiety is relevant related to maybe blacking out the previous night and not remembering anything that happened and suddenly scrambling to piece together what they did that night, which may or may not have been the best behaviors. So that is like a second piece to that
Right, your
sensation.
behaviors or the regret for that is also fueling that anxiety. The anxiety is one of those things that one of the ways that I like to describe it is like a level something that normally, like, you would have, like, a level 3 reaction, like, whatever that stimulus is, it's stressful. It's stressful, but you would kinda have that 3, and then you could dial it back, but in this case, our body, that stress response is heightened, and we respond like it was a level 10, and everything is, like, revved up, and it's that heightened stress response that when we're drinking on that regular, whether it's daily or most days, even just having a couple of drinks a day ongoing, is really kind of oversensitizing that our body's stress response. And I think it's one of those things that alone is such a vicious cycle because when that's happening, what do? We feel better when we have that drink. And it's just such a
Yeah.
spiral.
Yeah. And there's even evidence that chronic, like having anxiety over a repeated period of time, it can increase your likelihood of developing an anxiety disorder, developing a major depressive disorder. And it's just a negatively reinforcing cycle. There's also evidence that this can be bidirectional. So, somebody like me who is more prone to anxiety just from genetic reasons could also be more likely at higher risk of developing alcohol use disorder,
Right.
which I find so powerful.
How soon did you notice a difference? So when you said, okay, I'm going to choose to, and what you and I are sharing both now, admittedly anecdotal, that we're sharing our own personal experiences on it, but how soon did you notice like a shift in how anxious you were feeling, like that you noticed a benefit in that?
I would say it's probably, I don't know, I'd say the first weekend maybe that I wasn't drinking, I was waking up like, I don't know, the day was brighter. It felt clearer. I felt like I don't feel like I need to go have a hamburger or like a greasy breakfast sandwich to somehow rejuvenate
Right.
myself. I felt
Band-aid
like I could
yourself.
go out,
Right.
run, I could go do my thing, and I wasn't worried about anything that happened the night before. I didn't do something stupid at a party. My partner at the time, that was not the case for them, and they woke up not knowing what happened, but they didn't care. So
Right.
that's another way of looking at it too.
Waking up with like a sense of peace versus a sense of dread, which that alone is going to change the level of anxiousness that we are even starting our day with. And so I think that is one element that if you're choosing to do a window of dry January, alcohol free for 40, whatever it is, really tuning in to how you're feeling. And for me, that very first week, I was like fortunate that I had a few situations that were bigger, putting me on the spot and kind of that focus that I knew I'd had that response negatively with anxiousness before. So I was able to see it very clearly. Like this is one a very big example, but we don't always have that in our normal week. We kind of just have our routine week, but how do little things affect us and how's our mood, our anxiousness? Some of our participants for Alcohol Free for 40, they'll say I like myself better. They say, "My family likes me better." One girl said, "Just so many less stupid fights," And so all of these things that when we look at mood, anxiety, it can be sometimes a very big effect, especially depending on what your job is or different circumstances you may find yourself in that might have a lot of pressure associated with them. Or it might be kind of that subtle baseline anxiety is just different and you feel more patient. You feel like you're not on such a short fuse. And so all of those things can really, I would say, more than anything, I think that can be the harder thing to notice. So I would encourage listeners to really tune into that to see that benefit. Anything else on the anxiety conversation before we step away from that? Just some other things for people a different way for maybe people to think about it or
I think this will play into some things we'll talk about a little later, but having that mindset of like, I'm going to use alcohol to cope with my anxiety, or alcohol is going to ease my social anxiety. In the research, it's been found to document, like, it's been documented that that is linked to feeling increased anxiety later on. So, not only it has to do with what's happening in your body, but your mind and your body are connected. So, like, your thoughts about drinking going into having a drink are going to affect the after effects as well.
I'm glad you said that. That very first week, it was a big first week that I talk about because I had the TV segment, I had a big presentation. I also had a work party that wasn't my own work. It was a company that I was invited to something that it was a party that I didn't know a lot of people. It was December, so it was a holiday party. And it was one of those, it's a holiday party, you don't know a lot of people. The first thing you think is, let me have a cocktail and that'll kind of like smooth things. But this was that very first week that I was like, I went 7 days without any drinks because I want to do my labs in 1 week and I want to have zero alcohol at all. And I want to see what those labs turn out like. So I was really, I go to this party and I knew maybe one person. And after that came and went. And I was like, wow, I ended up having a great time there. Had so many conversations with people. And I was like, all right, that's behind me. Oh, and then that weekend, it was like so I had gone maybe, it was like a Monday to a Monday was when I was going to have those next labs done. We had my husband's work party at our house. And that's often a party where, I mean, people stay maybe till 2, 3 in the morning. And it's that kind of a party. And I thought, if I made it through all those things without having any drinks and still also had so much fun. That was the thing. I was like, I had so much fun at those. And I thought, wow. So that social anxiety of thinking, I'm going to kind of just like buffer this or take the edge off with that drink. Once you get through a few of those types of events and you
Mhm.
realize, all right, that was all right. Like we can tell ourselves it's going to be way worse than it is. And then once you get through it, you're like, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, and that speaks to one of the primary mechanisms that we as to why we think dry January is linked to long-term reductions or maintaining abstinence is something called drink refusal self-efficacy, or that ability. It's a very
Like
that's the
it.
term, but it's that what you're describing, that after getting through one occasion where you maybe had to explain why you weren't drinking, you had to give all sorts of different rationale. You get really practiced at being able to do that to the point where, like, somebody asking you doesn't bother you at all, and you just are very matter of fact. And when you're more confident, people accept that a little easier than if you're seeming unsure, then they're like, "Ah, come on, have one." Like, and they start pushing drinks on you. But being able to just say, "No, I'm good." It's a skill, and we found that people tended to have higher rate themselves higher on that ability at the end of just 1 month, which has got implications for that maintenance over time, which I
Yeah.
think is really.
Okay. I like
Yeah.
that.
Drink refusal
Drink okay.
self-efficacy.
Drink, refusal, self-efficacy. So we can,
Yeah.
we can encourage our participants to pride themselves on their drink refusal self-efficacy. So some of the things that what were some of the, like, benefits when we talk about the quick things that we see right away? The feedback that we get from our participants, what I saw personally, the puffiness in your face, the clarity in your eyes, that under eye puffiness or circles. Another thing, as we're talking about kind of the inflammation and like the fast results people see, what I see a lot of our participants with alcohol free for 40, their focus is on weight. How much weight am I going to lose? And so that's really different for everyone. So, alcohol, part of it is the calories that can affect weight loss and fat loss. Some of it is the alcohol metabolism and depending on our level of consumption, alcohol can actually stall fat loss. It can inhibit how efficiently our body is using fat as that source of energy. And so What I would recommend though is there's so many other factors and variables, and weight can be a really um it can vary so much for people. Take alcohol out of the conversation. You can have two people who are creating the same type of a calorie deficit. They're increasing their movement, they're changing their diet. One's going to respond really well, maybe a lot quicker than the other. We see it in spouses and partners and friend groups. There's that person who has a much harder time. So knowing that going into something like an when you're dialing back or cutting out alcohol, losing weight may be a really nice byproduct of it, but it's not always going to be the guarantee. One thing too, I'll say, I don't know if y'all saw any of this in any of the kind of reviews that you did. We see a big increase in sugar cravings as people are giving up alcohol. And so I call it the ice cream confessions. When they come in for their follow-ups, we have it's literally that ice cream confessions. They'll say, I didn't drink this whole past, 6 weeks of Lent, or I didn't drink the whole six, whatever it is. 46 days, but I had ice cream every night and I never usually do. Well, obviously the scale is going to reflect that. And so we really encourage people at the onset also. I'm like, I don't want to hear you coming back in here with your ice cream confessions. Like we got to also make sure we're doing the other things that we know to nourish our bodies well.
Yeah. And part of where those ice cream or confessions or like that desire for carbs is a drop in glycogen or energy that's stored in the body. And this is usually followed by like increases in cravings for more carbs. And of course, we know ice cream is delicious, but has lots of carbs in the form of sugar. There can,
I think it kind of strikes me that some of the reasons that we've talked about people are reaching for alcohol is the for however you would want to define it, but it's to feel good, to relax, to unwind, which also can be some of the same benefits of sugars and carbs and the way that it lights up those receptors in our brains as well. So when we're not getting that effect from alcohol, we're looking for that from external sources. And so something like ice cream, and it's often ice cream. It's sometimes other sources of sugar and carbs mixed with some fat and salt, but it's 9 times out of 10, it's ice cream. And so another way that we can kind of still get that benefit, some of these, the dopamine, the feel good chemicals kind of circulating through our body is movement. And so this is one where, as a dietitian, I know that going for a walk is not the same thing as having a pint of your favorite ice cream, but it can have a similar effect. And so even if you say, you know what, I really want that ice cream, try doing that walk first. Try doing something else that is going to have that kind of that dopamine release that can help us have that feel good sensation from these chemicals released through our bodies without alcohol, without ice cream. So shifting gears to something that is more longer term. So some of these that we're talking about have been in the short term when we're talking about sleep, anxiety, our mood, the visible signs, the inflammation, the puffiness, even our shifts in weight. Those are things that are kind of like the here and now. Something like cancer risk and the alcohol connection with our risk of cancer can feel very far down the road or feel very disconnected, detached from our behaviors right now. But we're seeing such a strong link between alcohol consumption, really so many different types of cancers. I would say breast cancer has some of the most research behind it, but we're seeing it on such a variety of different cancers. What's for us to know about that going in of the why, or if it's, one more reason for someone to consider shifting their patterns?
yes. So, as you were saying, it's been linked to so many different kinds of cancers. In fact, even light to moderate consumption has been linked to like 20,000 new cases of cancer in one study, and half of those were breast cancer. So, even at a very light drinking level, we're seeing that risk. Just giving a little background that organizations like the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization just a few years ago were all on the same page that any amount of alcohol was linked to risk for developing cancer, risk for cardiovascular disease, risk for diabetes type 2. And this was pretty powerful and pretty easy guideline for people to follow, and that they were like any alcohol is risky. Right now the guidelines are a little more opaque, and certainly a little more even more opaque with the new guidelines.
The diet.
They're the new dietary guidelines are not as clear and less clear when it comes to alcohol now.
When we look at, all the different types of cancer from esophageal, pancreatic, breast cancer is one that, like we said, has so much data behind it and specific really numbers tying in our consumption, tying it to our risk. And so when we look at what studies show us, women who have just 3 drinks a week, and that's our previous guidelines would say, women try to keep it to not more than a drink a day, men 2 drinks, not more than 2 drinks a day. So this is half that, less than half that for women, 3 drinks a week, 15% higher risk of breast cancer compared to women who don't drink at all. And then the estimate is that our risk for breast cancer goes up another 10% for each additional drink that we have on the regular. So just having 3 drinks a week raises our risk 15%. Every additional drink, another 10%. And so there's a lot of reasons why, like you said, that the influence on DNA methylation, alcohol, for when we're talking about breast cancer specifically, it raises estrogen levels. And so this being also one of the risk factors for certain types of breast cancer. So as well as the DNA alterations. So anything to like add in there to help people with context on risk there?
Sure. So this it comes back to alcohol metabolism. It's alcohol metabolism is not just happening in the liver, that is the most common organ we always hear about, but it is also being metabolized in the breast tissue and again forming that poisonous byproduct of acetaldehyde and leading to the reactive species, which leads to oxidative stress and then contributes to that DNA damage. So that's a little bit of what is happening under the surface. And of course, going along with the increases in estrogen, like increasing in circulating levels of estrogen in the body. And breast tissue in particular might be more susceptible to the effects of acetaldehyde than other organs in the body. So this is partly explains why breast cancer is half of the cases of cancer that are related to alcohol each year.
And this isn't, like we said in the very onset of this, it's not about fear mongering. It's about what the facts are. And so if you are at risk for breast cancer and talk with your physician about what your genetic history is, what types of breast cancer, how much could alcohol influence that risk? For you, what would be the recommendations that your providers would say? Is it something to be specifically concerned about, to look at actively down and back? What's your current patterns in your current consumption? So I think those are the things that there's starting to be more conversation around it. But boy, even like, when we look at the National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, there's all these different fundraisers for breast cancer and their mimosas and mammograms. And I'm like, we tie alcohol to the fundraisers, but it's a pink cocktail. So we tie it to the fundraisers for that. And so while I think some of the messaging is there, I think that there's still a real big disconnect.
Yeah, for sure. There is definitely a marketing push in the pinkifying of all products. Pink is for girls. Yeah, some women can get to a point where they feel a little skeptical and they're like, really, you're trying to
Yeah.
push this on?
I think my favorite pinkifying is when the NFL puts on like the pink accessories on the players, like the wristbands or shoes. I do like that. I like the little, it's like just a snippet of it. One of the ones that is sort of also can feel further out, something like cancer risk, but like you said, it may not. It can feel far away and far removed, but the other is heart health and our risk for heart attack, for stroke, as it's related to alcohol. And we won't spend a ton of time on this, but this is one that we actually could have started with this, but I wanted to really dive in with things that people see and feel the difference right away, and then kind of land on our cancer risk and heart health, things that might be a little more far removed. I would say the connection of alcohol is good for your heart, red wine is good for your heart, really was part of the driver to put this health halo around alcohol and drinking. And so for decades, we kind of told ourselves it was good for us. Our health professionals were telling us, dietitians, we were telling people, oh, it's good for your heart. And then the more we learned, the origins of that narrative, some were rooted in what was studies showing that there's the social aspect of drinking that can be beneficial. But the context, if you're looking at that alone teased out, it can be really misleading when you don't put in all these other factors that we're talking about. And so there's so many other foods and behaviors that benefit our heart health, that to specifically therapeutically introduce something like alcohol for heart health when there's all these other negative effects of it doesn't really make sense there.
Yes. Uh, what was the question?
No question, just a statement. But wait, I'm gonna go on a soapbox here. Okay, sigh. So the new Megan referenced just briefly the new dietary guidelines came out. And so as we're recording this, the new dietary guidelines came out last week.
Mhm,
And there's a lot we won't go deep into those, but one of the big changes that came out of these in previous guidelines, like we said, they had mentioned, that kind of put an upper limit on not more than one drink a day for women, two for men. The science
mhm.
that Megan and I have been talking about, it's clear that that's still too much for a lot of people. An average of a drink a day for women, 14 drinks a week for men, still too much for many people when we're talking about anxiety, if we're talking about blood pressure, if we're talking about cancer risk, all of these things. And so now the new guidelines just loosely recommend to basically keep drinking in check, but they removed any upper limits that are specified. So they really got a lot more lax. But here's the soapbox, Megan. Did you see the quote from Dr. Oz on this?
It's from Dr. Oz. Which was your favorite?
So if anyone's seeing it and you line up my words side by side, not exactly, I'm going to paraphrase, but his indication on alcohol was, hey, it's a social lubricant, meaning it brings people together. Exactly the stuff that we're talking about. People are using it for maybe that social anxiety that you have of going to a party. I'll have the drink. It'll make me more fun. Well, already kind of excusing it as or justifying it as a social lubricant kind of goes against the things that we're talking about. Also, when so much of our country is in like a mental health crisis and we're talking about the anxiety and the other things that are going into that are effects of alcohol. So his statement was alcohol is a social lubricant bringing people together. And
Mhm.
then part of his statement said, I mean, it's not like as long as you don't have it for breakfast or anything. There was a excusing as long as you don't have it for breakfast or anything. Are we kidding me? Like this isn't the conversation we need to have around alcohol. And so I was pleasantly surprised at a lot of aspects of the new dietary guidelines. I really liked the emphasis on ultra processed foods. I thought that there was a lot that came out that was really in a really positive direction on that. Alcohol was one that I felt like took several steps back in the dietary guidelines.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, before this administration, a report was going to be released that was going to align with the World Health Organization, and it was going to state the link between alcohol and cancer, and it was gonna say that these risks begin at 1 drink a day, but the new administration instead decided to pull that report and put forth a report that goes back to that moderate drinking is good for heart health. Yeah, it's like lower cause mortality. But that report still does note that there is a high breast cancer risk for women who drink. So we've got that going for us with the new report. But these perspectives do not align with even things like that different health organizations like the American Heart Association said just a few years ago. They're now all trying to line up with these new guidelines and trying to revive those old theories that have those studies had problematic designs.
I was complaining about it over the weekend, and my husband, we've been together now, gosh, almost 30 years. And so he's heard his fill of nutrition. And every year when the new dietary guidelines come out, I'm talking to him about it. And he's like, Molly, does anybody even pay attention to these? He's like, do you think my dad is paying attention to the guidelines? And I'm like, you're right. Well, this year, there's like way more attention on this. For our listeners, guidelines they're released every 5 years. So this is the 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines. In many cases, it's health professionals, it's people like Megan and myself that are looking at these. We're kind of dissecting them. What it does make it moves the needle on is industry and what the food industry is producing. And so I'll make this super fast, but things like sodium, when years ago the sodium recommended upper limits dropped, and the recommendation about processed foods and limiting this, food makers and things like frozen meals and healthy choice and lean cuisine slowly and quietly but steadily dropped their sodium intake. So if you look at those frozen meals now compared to a decade ago, there's maybe a third or half the sodium that there used to be, but they did it really kind of slowly and like didn't make a big bang about it, but really it influenced the food makers to drop the sodium in their foods. Same when trans fats, keep it as close to zero as possible. When that came out in the guidelines, food makers were how quickly can we remove all the trans fats from our foods? So the dietary guidelines influenced that. So as I was complaining about it this weekend, my husband pointed out, and I think he has a good point, that while it does influence industry in that way, this guideline about alcohol consumption, it gives us something to sink into and kind of point at that as a guideline. but how much does the general population how much were they saying, "Health guidelines say I'm a woman, I should have not more than 1 drink a day." Most people, that's not influencing how we're drinking and the choices we're making around alcohol. When we look at the food industry altering the things, the nutrients and things because of the dietary guidelines, vodka is vodka, wine is wine, and while there might be lower and, like, there's all these alcohol-free alternatives and lower alcohol alternatives, someone's decision to consume that isn't gonna be based on the dietary guidelines for the most part. There's always exceptions, but so it kind of I think maybe he was just trying to, like, make me feel better about it, but I do think that there's some of that.
Yeah, and I think your husband is onto something because I remember reading a study that said only maybe 60% of people follow the guidelines at all, any of them.
Have an awareness,
So
right, right, and then
have an
maybe
awareness that they exist.
yes, less
But
on
this
telling people what they should drink, yeah.
Yeah, and I was collaborating on a study recently with some colleagues at Brown that was looking at young people's awareness of the dietary guidelines for alcohol and like what knowledge is a drink, like what is a serving of a drink, a standard drink is what we call it. And they were pretty low, and they found that the guidelines, the ones that we're talking about, 1 drink a day, no more than 7 drinks a week for a woman, they found that confusing. They were like, "So can I have 7 drinks? Like, I could
Today,
just drink
right.
every single day? Or could I have 7 drinks, like, right now in one sitting?" Like, they didn't have a concept. They're like, "Well, why did you pick those numbers? Why not these other numbers?" So those they were questioning them or saying, "Those are too low, those are higher." It wasn't clear. The guidelines were opaque in how to follow them
Right.
appropriately before, and now there's
Not any
literally nothing to
specificity.
go on
Yeah.
and just saying, "Well, drink in moderation." What is
Not at
moderation?
don't have it for breakfast. And when we look
Yeah.
at I think, part of your research, your expertise is the internal and external drivers for why we drink. I think we talked a good bit about this as we went through kind of like what's happening in our bodies, but we've talked about the influence of social media, the drinking to relax or unwind, kind of the emotional regulation. Any other things that's kind of happening around that like social media in the moment decision making? I know we've covered a lot, but is there anything else there to, like, bring to someone's attention that something around them that might be influencing their drive to drink more than what they think?
Sure. Many, I mean, young people of all ages are on social media much more than they used to be. And they're usually absorbing so much content. And sometimes the alcohol content, the post that involves drinking, is just buried in there. And it's like more subtly that suggestion of like, this is alcohol is part of having fun. Alcohol is part of why this influencer is so popular. It's creating this image or that the halo effect, not just around health, but like elevating that alcohol as a status symbol. And these are just some things that get suggested, and you might compare yourself to other people. It's a common thing online. Well, that person's having a fun time. They're living their life better than me. They're drinking, and it looks like they're successful. So why don't I try that? We see that those kind of influences can be really salient for younger people and teenagers that they will go on to start drinking from seeing that kind of constant exposure in the media, not just social media, but all the streaming and all of the different YouTube and all like
I think
radio.
about, like, guys and younger guys and the fixation on bourbon and all the different specialty, like, bourbons and whiskeys, and there's a lot of that influence of these cool guys are doing this, or it's a status of these different types of, like,
Mhm.
brands or bottles, and it's really subtle, like, what you're describing, it might not even be that conscious processing of it, but it's super subtle as you're scrolling, and like you said, it's buried in there, but when it's repetitive and tied in with fun and kind of that whole lifestyle appeal, it becomes like without even having an awareness that we're noticing it, we're picking up on it.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes alcohol can become part of someone's identity.
And so if someone's thinking about this and they're looking at dry January, which as this drops will be like smack in the middle of that. But there's dry January, dry July, sober October, alcohol free for 40 starts right after Mardi Gras. I'll mention too, we'll put the link to sign up and it's just alcoholfreefor40.com and 40.com. And, when someone is reducing or dialing back or removing alcohol for even that short time, we talked about a lot of the improvements: sleep, anxiety, puffiness. So you'll see aesthetic improvements, things that are going to affect our mental well-being. Like we said, Megan and I were, some of them are going to take maybe a few weeks or longer for something like your sleep to settle in, but right away you might notice that puffiness is gone in your face, or you're waking up with like less of that sense of dread and waking up more with a sense of peace. Else it would be like a practical takeaway for listeners if they say, I've done this every year. Some people do the alcohol free for 40 every year and they're like, they may not complete it, but they've gotten further and further and further. One girl said, "Every year I feel like I get mightier and mightier," you know? And then last year was actually the first year after maybe 7 years she completed it fully, actually 2 years ago. And so last year she reached out and said, "I'm sorry I'm not gonna see y'all, but I haven't drank since the previous year." And we're like, "Wow." But she was the one that was, "I would get mightier and mightier every year," and she just kinda stuck with it. So if it's someone who's never done giving up alcohol for this window of time, or someone like her who kind of falters but tries it again each year, "Can I go a little bit longer?" What are some things, what's like your 1 or 2 big things that would just be right now to pay attention to that could be motivation to stick with it?
Sure. I think one thing that I've seen, at least in the literature, is you might not see all of the physical benefits or physiological benefits from stopping drinking or reduce, like, if you don't maintain it for the entire 40 days, but keep in mind like your mental health and clarity. That's one thing that will improve for sure, even if you just reduce your drinking. And another thing I would have to say is we have something called the abstinence violation effect, where you fall off the wagon, you slip up, you have a drink. Try to work on shifting your mindset to be like, I am not a failure. Don't give up and just be like, that's it, I'm done with this, which we see in the chatter online usually are people talking about how they like, that's it, this is stupid now. And this is just too much. And then they start making fun of people who are doing it, but try to shift it to be more positive and be more like, okay, well, I had a drink. Well, later this evening, I can try to not have another drink, or the next day, or the next time, I can try to not drink. I can just restart the next day. Just being kinder to yourself, because we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes, and you shouldn't be beating yourself up. As you're saying with this participant, she got mightier and mightier. She got better at probably refusing drinks
Right.
and saw more of the benefits. Another thing is remembering why you decided to try this. What was your motivating factor that got you to, like, kind of tipped you over the edge? And try to keep that in mind when you're thinking about having a drink or the cravings are really strong, which they can be really early in withdrawal. That's the number one predictor of people starting drinking again, is because they're feeling those physiological urges. Try to have that, like, think back to take a pause and think of why you did this. Those are 2 things that kinda come to mind right now.
Add a third in is think ahead of time. We talk a lot about replacement behaviors. What are you going to do instead of that drink? And if it can involve movement, even better for the reasons we talked about earlier. Some people they're like using that time to organize things that they didn't take the time for, going through all those photos or whatever that is. But knowing that, what thinking ahead what that replacement behavior is gonna be when that time hits, when you're used to usually pouring whatever that drink is, what are you gonna do instead? And we often call it like our witching hour, like, that's gonna be that window of time that the craving hits, and for many people, it'll pass, 30 minutes, it's passed, but so sticking through that and finding something else to put your focus on and knowing that that'll pass. So, and like you said, just kind of giving yourself that same compassion that you would for someone else if you slip up, getting right back on track. We'll include the links to a lot of the things that Megan and I talked about. And I'm grateful for you, Megan, of spending the time with us, taking so much of your time to share the details and kind of that peek behind the curtain of your work in this space. So I really appreciate what you're doing. and the research that you're pulling together for us to learn from. And it's something that has a lot of emotion around it. And I think that you kind of have that real sweet spot of personally being able to understand and identify with that emotion, and then also being able to kind of logic us through it with the data. So thank you.
Yes. Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm glad I got to share about why we drink and what happens.
A tremendous thank you to Dr. Megan Strowger for sharing her time and her expertise and her experiences, personal experiences with us. As we talked about, we'll include the links that we mentioned in the show notes of this episode. And always let me know what you think. If you're incorporating, some of the alcohol-free strategies, if you're doing alcohol-free for 40, if you've done it before and you want to share about it, I always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.